So, Joy, have you ever been to a Turkish prison? Do you like gladiator movies? By the way, is there anyone listening who knows how to fly a plane? Well, looks like I picked the wrong day to give up Thrive Loud with Lou Diamond. That and sniffing glue. Not that there's a difference.
Get ready to thrive loud with Lou Diamond.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Thrive Loud with Lou Diamond, connecting you to the most inspiring and amazing people that are thriving each and every day. I'm your host, Lou Diamond. Today on Thrive Loud, we have a keynote speaker, author, and consultant. He is an employee engagement and workplace culture expert who will challenge you to think differently. A former corporate human resource executive, he has dedicated his career to helping leaders build organizations that are good for both people and profits. He's the author of The Unlocking High Performance and Social Gravity. He's a big-time Duke Blue Devil basketball fan, and he's decked out in gear today. Thrive Loud listeners from just outside of Omaha, Nebraska, Jason Lauritsen. Jason, how are you today?
I am awesome. Thanks, Lou.
This podcast interview has been brought to you by Julianne Sullivan. We're giving her a shout out because she's one of my favorite people and said, you need to talk to Jason and get him on this show. And Julianne's been a guest of Thrive Loud, a good friend of mine, who I'm actually seeing this week in New York, actually coming up. So that'll be pretty good, or at the time we're recording this. And so she would have already met with us, so she'll know to listen afterwards. But Jason's got a great story, and I love people who are experts in certain areas, specifically in this workplace culture space. Can I understand and share with the listeners, if you could, Jason, how this became your superpower?
Honestly, I think it's because I've worked in some pretty terrible workplaces. I had some really bad bosses and worked in some really toxic places. And I think I've always been one of those people that when you see something that's a complete mess, it's like there has to be a better way. This can't be the way that it's supposed to work. And so I think that's really what set me down the path. Mm-hmm. And then, I found my way eventually into an organization where they gave me sort of I guess the freedom to experiment and try and do some things. And it was an extraordinary opportunity. A lot of stars aligned, but we were able to really do some transformative work through employee engagement and some other things that we did that had profound impact, which also then sort of was when I think I became really resolute that, yeah, there is a better way to do this, and it is possible. It is hard, but it is possible. And I think that's where it's like, I want to spend the rest of my life helping unsuck work, because there's too many people suffering every day at work.
I want to tap into what you're seeing today. Our listeners we've got a whole range of them. Those work in big corporate environments. Those are entrepreneurs starting their own businesses or freelancing. The range is tremendous. Is there one common problem that is more prevalent today than you've ever seen before in your career?
That's a great question. I don't know. I don't know if it's more prevalent today as much as I think it's just amplified that and I'm sure you've talked about this many times, but as we, as social media has exploded and all these things, technology has kind of captured our lives, and we're supposed to feel more connected than ever because of all of these social networking opportunities and all of our devices. And yet it seems that we're getting more isolated and more lonely and all of these things in our person, more disconnected. I think the fact that in the workplace where we literally work feet away from people all day long, and we have these people that are responsible for our experience at work. I think the fact that we're not doing a great job in the workplace of fostering that sense of connectedness and really building a strong sense of relationship with those, or allowing it even to happen with those we work with and those we work for, I think that's starting to amplify in importance because of this isolation that I think we're increasingly feeling sort of everywhere in our lives. And so I think one of the primary things that you're you're starting to feel the pain more acutely of poor communication and a lack of connection and all of that in the workplace today.
It really is amazing. I actually visited a company not too far away from me, just outside the New York City area, probably about 30 some odd people in a pretty small space. And nobody was actually getting up and talking to one another. There was just a lot of typing going on, instant messages, Slack channels, and sending stuff in and using what they think might be fastest to communicate, but not necessarily what is most effective and actually most powerful for how you can really improve the way you connect. So I get it. And these devices that supposedly are connecting us or disconnecting us. Yeah. How do you work with these organizations to kind of mix up the culture a little bit to get them to start talking to one another?
Sure. Well, I think it starts with the work that I do and where I have realized you go back to superpower. What I realized my superpower is in challenging and changing people's mindset and how they think about work, because I think we have to think differently before we do differently. And so where I tend to start is by introducing and helping people understand that all of at least the research that is out there, I believe, that has been done around employee engagement, employee satisfaction, and all of this different work that we've done to understand how employees experience work and why it's not working, it all points back to this simple idea that, while most organizations work has been designed to operate like a contract, so that the employer hires the employee under this sort of employment contract agreement where we hire you, we pay you money for your time and energy or effort. That's how it was built and designed 150 years ago. The problem is all this research says that the way that we actually experience work as employees is much, much more like a relationship. We want to feel valued and trusted and cared for and connected and appreciated and included and all of these things. And so fundamentally, we have to recognize that we have workplaces and work processes and technology designed around enforcing a contract. And yet on the other end of those things are human beings who want to be in a relationship with work. And so when we start to understand and recognize that, everything starts to look different. The way that we approach day-to-day conversations, the way that we design work processes, the way that we implement technology needs to be through the lens of, does this strengthen the relationship or does this harm the relationship? And so when you start to understand that and you start to lean into, instead of workplace best practice, I need to be looking at what makes for healthy relationships. How do you do better communication? How do you make people feel appreciated? How do you demonstrate commitment? Those kinds of things, when you start to lean into that, that's where I start, is on that mindset, because if you can get that switch to flip, then everything starts to look different.
How do you flip the switch? Or maybe better asked here, is it possible that the work might suck versus the culture might sucking?
Sure.
Is there a situation where it really is the work that sucks that they're doing, or is it usually just the culture and they paint it that way? Help us understand what really does suck today.
Well, I think here my perspective is that, at least, and even through my own experience, is that you can be, my favorite corporate job I've had, and I don't plan to have any more of these. I'm much better. I don't do well as an employee. So, but my favorite corporate job was actually working at a debt collection agency. And this is where we did all this breakthrough work around employee engagement and all this. And I mean, we had people on the phone every day calling and collecting, trying to collect money from people. Like, that's what they did. It's a terrible job.
Yeah.
And some of them were calling like the next of kin of people, where the debtor was deceased. Like, you talk about a terrible job, terrible work. And yet, when you create the right kind of environment around that, and you create the right mindset, and you do all of that, you can actually create a fairly positive experience around work that isn't even that pleasant. And so I do think there are situations where the job just, the work itself just sucks. The job sucks for whatever. We amplify that, though. Some of those jobs have to get done. And in order to make that happen, you have to compensate around that by creating a culture or a management experience that's better. And so, yes, there are jobs that suck, and that is what it is. But if that's there are a lot of really well-paying, sucky, work opportunities out there. Find one that exists in an organization where they treat people like human beings.
Jason, share with the listeners how important it is that your work is directed at working with the leaders or the managers so that they're on board versus obviously being brought in maybe to help out with just the employees.
Yeah. If the intent is to change your organization, if the intent is to make work better for everybody in the organization, it has to start with the leaders. There's no shortcut around that. The organization reflects the leaders. The culture is essentially a reflection of the leadership's style and personality. So it has to. That doesn't mean that there aren't things you can do as an employee to make your own work experience better, or to sort of triage within your team if you're in a bad culture to create a better team experience. You can do that, but that's a very small, that's sort of a short-term solution. But to fix it, it's got to be, leaders have to be transformed.
Biggest challenge that you have faced since you've specialized in this work in helping to change a culture? You don't have to give the specific name of the company or whatever it is, but just the biggest challenge you've dealt with and how you overcame that challenge.
I think the punchline on this probably is different than you expect, but the biggest challenge was, to your previous question, was leaders that just didn't get it or didn't care.
Right.
Sometimes there are leaders that just don't, for whatever reason, because either they're a bad person or they grew up in a bad system or whatever. They just don't care really to do the work to take care of people or to create an experience that was good for people. And so I was in a culture where I was fighting uphill. We were trying to do the right thing. We were doing all of the right things to convert, and the leaders just didn't care. They wouldn't invest. They kept cutting and undermining. And so the solution was I went and found different leaders to work for. Sometimes you can't save people from themselves. And if the people you're trying to save are at the top of the organization, there comes a point where quitting is the best strategy. Find some place that gets it and do the work there.
I love asking this question because you're an entrepreneur, you're a thought leader, you help people with these messages. And obviously we'll talk a little bit about the books you've written too in a few, but I want to understand a little more about Jason. And that is, on days that you have trouble thriving, because normally you're helping other people and pick them up and get them in the right game plan. But when you personally have trouble thriving, who or what practice do you seek to get back on the thriving track?
Probably the most common thing, my go-to thing, is to go run. Running is sort of if I need to break loose or if I'm stuck, then I go for a run. And usually, 3-4 miles will break something loose and get the blood flowing and reframe things. So that's number one. Number two is I use a journaling practice. I'm not an everyday journaler, but when I get stuck, running is number one. Number two is I have a particular way of journaling that's sort of you start and you free flow, you write for a fixed amount of time just to get out whatever is inside. I will meditate. And then after those three things, I've got a handful of go-to people I will call to bust me out of it if I need to. But generally by the time I get through those three practices, running, journaling, and meditating, I'm back in it.
Let's talk about Unlocking High Performance. This is your most recent book. What was the aha moment that said, this is what I'm going to focus on next, and telling that story from?
That's a great question. I don't know from a moment. That book is, the way I've described that book is that book took me 20 years to write. It's sort of
it was a 19-year aha. Okay.
Yeah, it was one of those moments where the opportunity to write that book presented itself, and when that happened, it was like, okay, yeah, no, this is the time where I'm going to take what I have learned so far on this journey, and we're going to piece that into something that people can take and use. And so, but I think it was this, when I had this recognition of this contract versus relationship that I talked about a moment ago, when that hit me, I think that's when I knew. And that's what, within this book, it's really unpacking if once you recognize that that is what's going on and that we need to redesign work to feel like a healthy relationship in order to really free people to do their best work, that's what the book was about. And I wanted to tell that story. So that's probably the moment sort of around when that aha hit me, is when it became clear.
Jason, let's share with the listeners all the places people can find you, websites, links, social media handles, anything, events coming up. We will put it all in the show notes. However, it always comes better when they hear it directly from you.
Sure. Well, the best place to find me, if you can figure out how to spell my name, you can find me everywhere, because thankfully, for whatever reason, I wish I could say it was by design, I used my name for all of my social handles. It's Jason Lauritsen. So my website is jasonlauritsen.com, and you'll find lots of stuff there. I blog regularly there, trying to give hip tips and insights on how you can make work better. You can find me on Twitter and LinkedIn and Facebook and every place else with Jason Lauritsen, YouTube. One of the cool things that I think I would offer up to those listening, if you're a manager or you're in an organization and you want to improve engagement, we launched a video series earlier this year that you can subscribe to. If you go to my website, you go up on the resources, there's a drop down, it'll say Igniting Engagement video series. You can subscribe, and for the next 25 weeks, you'll have a 10-minute video interview I did with an expert that will land in your email box on Monday morning to give you some insights and inspiration on how to make work better.
Awesome. I like it. Jason, I want to head down Fun Street over here on Thrive Loud. We're going to have some fun on some of the fun questions. Not that we haven't been having fun the entire time. Start off by sharing with the listeners your all-time favorite movie.
I think that's a hard one for me, but I think it's Gladiator.
Okay, and why does that movie connect so much with you?
I love the story arc of it, I think, because it was I tend to be a fan of the rebel, the person that sort of stands up against the system or breaks a mold or charts a different path. And I always remember that moment in the movie after he's laid waste to all of these, he was supposed to die. And he turns to the emperor and says, "Are you not entertained?" And I that moment sticks in me. And I think in my career, I kind of have chased the moments like that. So I love it.
Yeah, I also love he has done. Russell Crowe did such a great job of embodying what a leader is in whatever the situation might be, and it's just a wonderful way of thinking about the whole versus thinking about the individual. It's pretty cool stuff. All right, so along those lines, you're a speaker. And you go on stage and you talk and you share your message. Do you have like a jam that you love to hear when you get up on stage, that the music or that pumps you up, or when you're running, something that gets you motivated that you love to listen to that helps take you to that next level so you can thrive?
I love dance music and electronic music. So I listen to a lot of this. My kids even think I'm silly for listening to this, but I actually, the song that always puts me in a good mood, and this is probably going to tell you a little bit too much about me, but I'm a big LMFAO fan. So Sexy and I Know It comes on, man. I am all in. So I don't know what that says. I'll just leave that there. But that is a song that I love that jam.
I have a new visual of you hopping on stage hearing that message. That's all I need to go with. So right at the opening of this lovely interview we've had here, even before we hit the record button, I learned that you have a favorite sports team. In fact, you're literally donning not only the hat, but your microphone is colored in the same blue. Share with the listeners a little bit about your passion for the Duke Blue Devils.
Usually I don't lead with that. You led with that. So like half the audience hated me before we even got into this today. So okay. I hopefully I can overcome this, but I honestly think my love, I have been a Duke Blue Devil basketball fan as long as I can remember. I don't remember a time in my life when I wasn't, and which is weird because I grew up on a farm in Northwest Iowa. So explain that to me. But I think it had something to do with my mom has a cousin that lives in Durham. Mm-hmm. So I think there's something there. I know at one point we went to visit the Duke campus when I was growing up, but that was after I was a fan, because I remember remember how big of a deal it was to step inside of Cameron and see the inside of the gym. And so So I don't know, but what I can tell you is I worked very hard to infect my children with this affliction. And so at our house, when the Dukies are on, everything else comes to a screeching halt.
So I'll give you my little Duke Blue Devil thing. I think there was a window where I did hate them, and more of it. I've actually played against Bobby Hurley in my basketball playing days. Yeah, well, awesome. Not necessarily saying I was even a presence. It was one of those like 50-point blowouts in those games that they allow people to play against teams in New Jersey City. So that component of that, obviously watched them. I am the same age as Christian Laettner, for those who want to figure that out. So I got to watch his success throughout my college careers mirrored that of the whole Duke era. But later in life, obviously, I got to hear Coach K speak, who's one of my favorite leaders and speakers you'll ever run across, and what an incredible individual. Although there were some moments in there, my sister went to Maryland, so there was a couple of years I did root against Duke in those cases. That's however, I'd like to know, and I think our listeners would too, give me your favorite starting five for all your Duke fans. Try and pick your best five for the Duke Blue Devils.
Boy.
Like your all-time team, if you would.
The all-time team. Boy, that would be a hard one because
I only ask hard questions. I've literally, Jason, made you stop and think every single question today. Hasn't every listener heard that?
I thought these podcasts were supposed to get you're supposed to give us warnings so we can look genius and smart ahead of time.
We knew guests on Thrive Loud could handle stuff like this, and guys who are as great communicators and know how to connect people, that's what you do. So I figured.
So the guys that come to mind that I love, and I don't know how I would. My favorite Duke players of all time would be, I loved, obviously Laettner would have to be in there. Battier would have to be in there. Reddick, Jason Williams, back when he was still Jason Williams. Wojciechowski was, Wojo it's hard not to love that guy. It'd be more interesting even, I think, these people that don't even watch Duke know most of these names. It'd probably be a more interesting question to ask, who are my least favorite Duke players of all time.
Do you have a least favorite? Well, we could put that. By the way, that was a great five just to throw out there and a wonderful team. So
my least favorite of all time is Austin Rivers.
Really?
And then my second least favorite was McRoberts.
So just recently, and this, for those listeners, we're recording this at the end of 2019, and only about a month ago, Austin Rivers literally got into a spat with his own dad on the NBA court, right? Did you see that happen?
Yeah, I did. Yeah,
he was urging the refs to call a technical against his own father. Thanksgiving must not have been good at the Rivers house this week.
No, that was a miss. That was a miss on Coach K's part all the way across. I did not like that kid.
Yeah, well, each of them there. Well, with that, thank you for sharing your passion across the board. Jason, continued success to you, your business. And thanks for coming on Thrive Loud today and being a good sport and handling all these more tough questions you actually had to think about it.
Listen, I love it. I love a good question. Thanks for having me, Lou. I appreciate it.
And to all our Thrive Loud listeners out there, thank you for joining us. And until next time, keep thriving onward and upward. And remember, be brief, be bright, be gone.
You've been listening to Thrive Loud with your host, Lou Diamond. Make sure to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts and check us out on the web at thriveloud.com or follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook at Thrive Loud.